So for the last 2 weeks, we've been going through the topic called Fundamentals of Financial Markets. We went through an important concept called the interest rates. So we saw the significance of the interest rate, the types of interest rates available, how do we calculate those interest rates, then how is this interest rate determined based on two theories, the loanable funds theory and the liquidity preference theory. And then we move to why there are so many different interest rates for different securities. So there we studied two concepts, risk structure of interest rate and term structure of interest rate. These two concepts taught us by securities, even though there was some commonality between these securities, still they had a different interest rate. So first of all, we saw even though securities had the same maturity period, still the interest rates were different. And that was explained to us by the risk structure of interest rate. The concept that explained this difference was the risk structure of interest rate. This concept told us, look here, this difference is coming because the risk and the liquidity characteristics of these securities are different, and because of that the interest rates are also different between these securities. The main reasons were default or credit risk, liquidity risk, and then we saw informational cost. If the investor had to incur an additional cost in acquiring information to research about the borrower, to know about the borrower, that had an incremental cost adding on. So for that incremental cost, the investors required an additional interest premium. So that again resulted in certain securities having a higher interest compared to the others. Then we moved and then we looked into this other concept called the term structure of interest rate. This concept taught us that even though securities had the same risk and liquidity characteristics, still the interest rates were different. And this difference, or what causes this difference, was highlighted through the concept called the term structure. So what was the reason that this concept told us? This is because the differing terms to maturity. Even though securities had the same characteristics, because they had different maturity periods, the interest rates had to be different. Now, unlike the risk structure, we were able to give out a graphical representation of the term structure using the yield curve. So yield curve is a graphical representation that told us the relationship between the interest rate and terms to maturity. So there were 4 types of yield curve, and each of these 4 types we understood what caused them, what was indicating this, what was indicated through this yield curve. Understand that, remember the very first period refers to the shorter term, and then the long term is highlighted. If you go through this graph, you could see, let's go to the highlighter. So initially these few yes, so the first few closer in this particular area would highlight you the short-term interest rate, and thereafter you could see the long-term interest rate, how the movement is anticipated. Okay. So understand the four types and understand what is indicated through these yield curves. All right. And then we saw a practical example. We saw in real life when we derived the yield curve in different periods of time, we saw that the yield curve actually represented what was happening in the market or what was the expectation going on in the market. That's what the example that I have given here. Then we saw the theories which gave us the reasons as to why these curves are shaped in such a manner. So there were four theories. We had expectations, liquidity premium, and market segmentation and preferred habitat. Again, in this week's lecture note, if you go to this week's lecture note, you will find the previous lecture's summary in point form. And then I have included a summary for you about each individual theory. So it's easier for you when you're learning. Okay, in each individual theory, I have given you something like a short note. We will go through this as well in detail. So here, if you see the expectation theory, what was the key assumption there? It told us, look here, the interest rate of a long-term security will equal to the average of the short-term interest rate. Average of the short-term interest rate that is expected to occur over the life of the long-term security. Now, for example, if our long-term security, if the long-term security that we're talking about here is, let's assume, a 2-year bond, the interest rate of that 2-year bond will equal to the average of the short-term interest rate. So which meaning the interest rate for the first year, the short-term interest rate for a 1-year period, and the short-term interest rate that you expect when you move to the next period, next time. Now, if you draw on a graph, it will be easier for you. Let's see. So we are talking about a 2-year bond here. Okay, a 2-year bond. So the interest rate of a 2-year bond is equal to the average of the short-term interest rate. So short-term interest rate in this period, let's say, is 8%. Short-term interest rate for another 1 year during this period, let's say, is 12%. As per the expectation theory, it tells us the average of these two. So 8% plus 12% divided by 2. Why? We're talking about 2 1-year periods here. Okay, is equal to 10%. So ideally, a 2-year bond, should carry an interest rate of 10%. That's what the expectation theory highlights to us. Okay, now assume if this is a 5-year bond that we're talking about, then you add the interest rate for the 1 year, interest rate for the second period, interest rate for the third, interest rate for the fourth, interest rate for the fifth, and then you divide by 5 to arrive at that 5-year bonds rate. This is what the expectation theory is assuming. Okay. What is the liquidity premium theory telling us? Liquidity premium theory tells us, look here, yes, expectation theory is correct. The interest rate of a long-term bond is equal to the average of short-term interest rate expected over the life of the long-term period. Okay, but in addition to that, In addition to that, there is also a liquidity premium, or certain texts call it as the term premium, that is paid for holding a long-term bond. Both of these involved makes up the interest rate for the long-term period. Do you understand? That is what is assumed by the LPT, or the liquidity premium theory. It's an extension of the expectations theory. Now, the market segmentation theory is totally different. The name itself tells you, look here, the key assumption in a market segmentation theory is the market for different maturity bonds are completely separate and segmented. So, interest rate of one maturity doesn't impact the interest rate of another maturity. Now, can you say that here? If this interest rate changes, then definitely this interest rate will also change. Okay, I'm talking about the expectations theory here. But in the market segmentation theory says no. Each segment is a different market. So just because one interest rate change, it doesn't impact the other. Okay. Preferred habitat theory is a combination of liquidity premium plus market segmentation. What does the preferred habitat theory tells you? Look here, yes. Each investor has a preferred maturity. Remember the example, if I have to buy a house in 5 years, I will look for an investment which will mature in 5 years so I can take the money out. I don't want to go and invest in in a 10-year bond because I have a requirement in 5 years down the line. Okay, so that kind of a preference maturity is there with every one of us. That's what this theory is telling. Now, for an investor with such preference, to be moved or to be attracted to a longer term bond, you have to pay a higher premium or an additional interest premium to induce the investor to move to a longer term bond and to deviate from the preferred maturity. That's what the preferred habitat theory advocates. All right. So here investors have preference for a particular maturity. So that is the preferred. That is why the term preferred habitat came to this theory. Why? They assume investors have a maturity in mind, a maturity that they like. Okay. So for the investors to buy a longer bond, they need to be compensated with a higher expected return. So these are the key assumptions in each of these theories. Okay. Now, what is the implication that we get from this particular theory? Here we learn expectations theory. We learn that because the long term of a security, interest rate of a long term security is the average of the short term interest rate, any investor is indifferent to choose between the maturity periods. In other words, it says bonds of different periods are perfect substitutes. I will explain that here. So this is 1 year, and this is the, so this is time essentially. Okay. Hide this graph over there. Okay. Now, what was the earlier example we saw? We saw that during this period, for this 1 year period, interest rate was 8%. Okay. For this additional 1 year, the short-term interest rate was 12%. So as per expectations theory, it told us for you to find the interest rate of a 2-year bond. Now we are going to find the interest rate of the 2-year bond. You have to take the average of the short-term interest rates, which is 10%. Now, if you are an investor, now you're making the decision, okay? You know that if you invest in a 1-year security, you're going to get 8%. And then again, you reinvest that for another 1 year, you will get 12%. So on a gross basis, you will arrive at maybe 20%. I'm adding it up. Same thing if you go for a 2-year bond, for the during the 2-year period, per year you will get 10%. Remember, interest rate is quoted per annum. So this is 10% per annum. So again, that will give you 20%. So you're more or less indifferent. There's nothing to choose. You rather go invest in a 2-year direct, or maybe you have 1 year and reinvest for another 1 year. It will give you the same return. So it's a perfect substitute for you. There is no any additional gain that you will get out of this. That's why, as per expectations theory, they say bonds of different maturities are perfect substitutes. Okay, just even if you go to a short-term investment where you invest for 1 year and then again you invest for another 1 year, renewing it, or you go directly for a long-term investment at once, you invest for the 2 years, both of you all are going to end up with the same return. So there is no any difference. It's indifferent for an investor to choose between the time periods. That is what is highlighted here. Now, liquidity premium theory, what is the implication that we get? For you to attract the investor to a long-term instrument, you need to offer, especially these are learnings that an issuer can get. As an issuer, you need to know investors should be compensated with something called a liquidity premium or a term premium, so that they can attract more investors. Now, market segmentation theory, the learning that we get there is the bonds are not perfect substitutes at all. So this is completely market segmentation. The implication that we get from the market segmentation theory is completely opposite to that of the expectations theory. Expectation theory says, look here, all the bonds of different maturities are substitutes, perfect substitutes for you. But market segmentation says, no, it's different markets. So you can't substitute bonds of one period with another. So they are not substitutes at all. Preferred habitat. There again, the learning that we get is, for an investor to be induced to move to a longer term or to be induced to move from their preference maturity, they need to be compensated with a higher premium. Then we now we move on to see how the yield curve is justified. Okay, so what is the criteria that we are looking at here? We are looking at, does the theory explain why the yield curve is likely to have an upward slope when the short-term interest rates are low? And does it explain why the yield curve is more likely to shape downwards when interest rates are high? Now, don't get this requirement wrong. What they're simply asking is, when the interest rates are low, meaning, remember, we are talking about a short-term period here. So when a yield curve is sloping upwards, the short-term interest rate is low, that is given. That's why it says likely to have an upward slope when the short-term interest rates are low, and likely to have a downward or inward yield curve when the short-term interest rates are high. Okay, so let's see how each of these theories justify that. Expectations theories, yes, it explains us why the yield curve is acting that way. What is the explanation that it gives? This theory says, when the short-term interest rates are low, investors in general, we expect in the long term, interest rates will move or increase to a normal level. This is only a short-term impact for this to be so low, but in the future, this will pick up. Similarly, when the yield curve is an inverted yield curve, or when we are in a period where the short-term interest rates are high, expectation theory suggests that the investors believe in the long term this unusual highness in the short-term interest rate will subside and the long-term interest rate will become low. Okay. Now, liquidity premium theory, how does it explain? It says, when the current short-term rates are low, investors generally expect the future interest rate to rise. Yes, especially with the additional boost of positive premium, the long-term interest rates will be higher and will be now more steeply upward sloping. Okay. Again, when the yield curve is inverted and the short-term interest rates are high, investors are usually, even though that there's a positive liquidity premium added on, the yield curve will slope upwards because they expect this short-term phenomena to subside in the future. Remember, liquidity premium is a extension of the expectation theory. So the fundamental is drawn from the expectation theory. Market segmentation theory, no, it doesn't tell us why it moves in such a way. Their complete belief is the market for a different maturity is totally separate, so they behave in a different manner. So one market cannot influence the other market, which meaning the short-term market movement cannot influence the long-term market movement. Okay. Again, preferred habitat also justifies the yield curve movements very much similar to the liquidity premium theory. Then finally, we see, does it suggest, or does the particular theory that we're talking about, does it suggest that yield curve are usually positively sloping? Now we know expectation theory had an argument or had a explanation for all types. Okay, so their belief is, no, yield curves are not usually positive sloping. It can go either way, it can go any way. Okay, so you can't have the presumption that yield curves are always positively sloping. But all the other three had a presumption. Look here, yield curves are usually upward sloping. Very rarely you find a downward slope. you usually general expectation or the general norm is yield curve is upward sloping. Now you will be confused, how come in the market segmentation theory there is a justification for this? If you go through the slide, I specifically told to highlight this part for you. Here, if you can highlight that, this theory can explain why yield curves are upward sloping. Why? Their explanation is, look here, investors, they prefer short-term bonds. Okay, they don't usually prefer long-term bonds. Because of that, the demand for long-term bonds is lower. When the demand is low, prices of those bonds are also low. So when the price is low, we know there's an inverse relationship of price to interest rate. So when the price is low, interest rates are high. Ideally, then long-term bonds will have a higher interest rate, resulting in a upward sloping yield curve, at least on a general term. All right. Then again, we also know that preferred habitat also advocates that yield curves are usually positive sloping. Finally, we study whether the theories justify why interest rate for different maturities move together. Now, expectation theory, we know why. If the short-term interest rate, when this particular interest rate is getting impacted, if the short-term interest rate of 8 and 12 is getting impacted, we definitely know that the long-term is also going to get hit. Why? The long-term is simply the average of the short-term rates. Okay, that's why we mentioned yes here. Again, in liquidity premium theory, it's a yes. Why am I saying yes here? It's an extension of the expectation theory, and also there is a liquidity premium added on. So if the liquidity premium added to a 2-year bond is 2%, definitely you have to have a liquidity premium added on to the 3rd and the 4th year. You can't just have for 1 year. So if interest rate for one period moves, the other maturities have also, it is also required to move together. Market segmentation theory, no. Why? Because the markets are separate. Just because there is one impact in one market, it doesn't slip and affect the other particular market or the particular maturity. Here you have to make it as yes, cut it off and say yes. Again, why? We have a premium added on for a long-term bond. So if the short-term rates are relatively high, then again for you to induce for a long-term bond, there should be an increment. So the movement happening in the short term, all the interest rate across the different maturities will have to eventually move together. If you can strike this off. And mention it as yes. Okay. Why I included that summaries, I understand so many students get confused as to what each theory tells you. Okay. So due to to avoid that confusion, there's a summary also included. So for you all to learn much easily. Then we went through the significance and the users of the yield curve. And there was an important term that we studied, riding the yield curve. Remember that, what kind of a strategy that they use. to get this capital gain from the market? Important. These are small things that they can test you in your MCQs. Remember, when it comes to the part 1 of your paper, there can be MCQs and small, shorter questions for you tried maybe in one sentences. So for those, these could be questioned. And today we are going to start off with the interest rates can be negative. Now, you and I both know, usually, especially in our country, we have always heard interest rates to be positive. What do you mean by positive? You hear interest rates to be 2%, 3%. You don't hear negative 2%, negative 3%. No. It's always a positive figure, that positive rate that we get. What is the fundamental norm out of it? If I am a lender, which means I have money and I am giving it to you to use it. You are the borrower. For a short period of time, you're using my funds, and maybe in 2 years' time, you will pay me back. Okay. Now, you're taking 2 years' time to pay it back. I'm going to charge you something for using my funds, and that is interest. Now, that interest is fundamentally paid by the borrower to the lender. Why? Borrower is the one using the funds. For the use of funds, I am charging, the lender is charging the borrower an interest. Now, what happens in a negative interest rate is the complete reversal of this. They are in an environment of a negative interest rate. Again, as a lender, I have money and you are the borrower. I give you money to use for 2 years. But instead of you, the borrower, paying me interest, myself, the lender, is going to pay you interest for using my funds. It's the negative interest rate. So the borrower here is at the benefit and the lender is discouraged. Now you will be wondering, what kind of a scenario is this? Is it correct for something like this to happen? Now this is a very unconventional tool that they use when the economy goes into a very strong deflationary situation. What is a deflationary situation? It is the continuous drop or the decline in the market general level prices. So think of yourself as a supplier. Okay, you are someone who's supplying goods and services to the economy. You would prefer price of your goods to increase over years, because then that is positive for you. At least on a general, normal, on a year-by-year basis, there should be some kind of an increment. Now, if you are in a deflationary situation, what happens is each moving year, the price of your goods are going to decline. Okay. Now, in such a decline, as a supplier, as a producer, will you be motivated to produce more? No, you're getting lower and lower. The prices are decreasing year by year. So when the producer is at a disadvantage, what happens is the production of the economy will get stagnated. In some situation, will start to shrink. Unemployment will start to increase. If you are from an economic background, the Phillips curve, when inflation increases, unemployment decreases. Inflation reduces, unemployment increases. So on a deflationary pressure situation, what happens is, as a producer, I'm not motivated to produce more. If I'm not motivated to produce more, I'm going to scale down my operation. If I'm going to scale down my operation, what unemployment levels are going to increase. So in such an environment, if the regulators feel that moving to a negative interest rate is the way to revive the economy, then yes, they will move to such a concept. Now, this negative interest rate has its positives and its negatives. Let's see what are the positives that it can do to our economy. Now, if you take the negative interest rate, the more I explained it to you what it is, so from that itself, you will get the benefits if you start thinking. Very first is lender is now having to pay interest to the borrower. So who is encouraged here? The borrower is encouraged. The borrowing culture is induced or promoted. So people or even businesses will begin to borrow money and start making investments. This will eventually stimulate the economic activities. That is one positive. The other is a general individual. Think of me in our example, I am the lender. Now, because I am lending to you, I have to give you, the borrower, interest as well. I have to pay you interest. I would think, what am I doing that? My saving, I'm going to give it to someone else. I'm paying them for using the money as well. Might as well spend it. Why don't I spend on consumption, buy a new vehicle, buy new phones, enjoy? So that in that environment, consumption will start to increase. The consumption will be encouraged. Now this will result in the market demand picking up. All right. Now both of these will eventually help in improving employment levels. Why? Now people are consuming more, demand is more. To meet the demand, production will have to be increased. On the other side, borrowing money is very, very lucrative. You might as well borrow and expand your production. So in that environment, employment levels will also begin to increase. So slowly the economy will be able to move from a deflationary position to a more inflationary or to a moderate inflationary pressure. All right. What are the negatives from this negative environment? Sorry, negative interest rate environment. Here, who is benefited? The borrower. The lender is discouraged. So the surplus unit or the savers in the economy are now penalized. Why? Because you saved, you are now penalized. Because you have money to be deposited, the excess money, you are at a loss where you need to pay interest for the borrower to use your funds. So the negative interest rate environment is penalizing the savers or the surplus units of the economy. That is the very first one. The second one is think about banks. What's going to happen to the banks? What does the bank do? They accept deposits on a short-term basis, and now they are going to lend. Okay, now I am the middleman. Assume I am the bank. I am giving money to borrowers. Now, who is going to pay? Now, let's say I am giving money to X company to put up a factory. X company is the borrower. Who is going to pay interest? Now, in the negative interest environment, the bank will end up paying interest to X company. You are borrowing 100 rupees. If my interest rate is 10%, for the 100 rupees each year, the bank will keep crediting, take 10 rupees from me, take 10 rupees from me. The borrower is jolly well encouraged. On the other hand, what's going to happen? I am the bank. I have certain deposits with me taken from the savers. Now, who is the borrower? Deposit is with me. So, I am going to charge interest from my saving community. If one of you is coming with a deposit to me, I will accept the deposit. Let's say again 100 rupees. I will accept 100 rupees from you, okay. But end of each year, I'm going to debit you, let's say 8%. I'm going to debit 8 rupees from your account and keep taking 8 rupees from you to my accounts. Okay. So for a financial intermediary, the deposits are going to decline. Why? People would say, why am I saving? I'm losing money here. So might as well spend. So people will keep withdrawing the deposits. On the other hand, borrowers are encouraged. There's so much of borrowing happening in the market. And you have to keep lending and you have to keep giving interest. So the financial intermediary is now at a crossroad or is impacted from this negative environment, negative interest rate environment. Other downfall is it's going to increase the wealth inequality in our economy. What's going to happen? The community or the wealthy community which had funds or the surplus units are going to get discouraged now, and a borrowing community is going to acquire more wealth. So the inequality is going to widen further. The final two downfalls are, remember, it's going to induce a borrowing culture, borrow and invest culture. So individuals or even businesses are now willing to take on more debt. Why? It's very lucrative for them. So they will leverage more, which will result in excessive risk-taking economy. Even though individuals or businesses, they are willing to take high risks, invest in very risky investments. Why? For that money, they are not going to pay any interest. That they don't have any cost on that borrowed money. Okay, so in that kind of a background, it's going to induce or promote a excessive risk-taking culture. Okay. Now, you will be wondering whether this is actually a practical thing that's happening in the market, especially after the COVID. Even during latter part of last year, somewhere around from June, July onwards, lot of the developed countries were actually looking into adapting negative interest rates. So one such country was UK. They are in discussions of actually whether to implement this to boost the economy. So here you can see free cash withdrawals. People will withdraw more. Why? No point of saving. So this is an article which is in December. Even currently, there's so many articles coming up. Ireland is in currently in the verge of discussing on adapting this. So read through what's happening in the market, especially what's happening in Bank of England is very, very important. You know, in your question, in your past papers, definitely one question comes from the latest financial market developments. Okay, so with that one, we will cover a bit more closer to exam. So there you're more ready about what's happening. So have a read through of this article. Just if you Google UK negative interest rate, you'll be getting all the needed material. Also, remember the Bank of England, they had a change in their governor. Currently, it's Andrew Bailey. Okay, remember the name, probable MCQ questions. Not only my subject, could be for anything. So keep it in your mind. Have a read through on this. Okay. Why they adapt such a policy is so they are able to kickstart the economy. So many people shutting down and unemployment increasing in this pandemic environment. they could, this is the last possible resort that they could move to induce or stimulate the market activity. Okay, so here you could see Andrew Bailey is the new governor. He was currently, you could say, old. Last March he was appointed. Go through this article and have a read up on that. Okay. This is what was happening in the latter end of 2020. This is the Euribor, the Euro interbank offer rate. So if you see this, you could see from maybe from 2015 onwards, you could see slight movements here in the negative range between 0 to -1. The interest rate have been moving. And the other is the Japan overnight call rate. You and I all know that Japan overnight call rate is the, Japan is a country that was a very famous example when you talk about deflation. Okay, so they are also a bit slightly in the, not too extreme, but in slightly in the negative interest rate environment. So with that, we will end our discussion on interest rate. Okay, so interest rate, you know, mainly is impacting our debt market. Direct impact is on the debt market. If you have borrowings, short or long term, interest rate is a very important variable. But does it mean that interest rate doesn't impact our equity market? No. It's not completely detached. You need to understand that interest rate has its impact on the stock market as well. We are going to see that it can happen in two ways. Okay. One obvious method, I would say this is like the most obvious way that interest rate could hit us, is, you know, in equity market, you have listed companies. Okay. Listed companies' performance is an important thing in the equity market. If a listed company is able to perform very well, they are able to generate more profit. That's what I'm meaning by performing very well, meaning I'm talking about they're able to generate more profits. That is going to attract more investors, increase the share price of that particular company's share. Okay. So when the interest rate, let's say interest rate is increasing, what happens? A listed company's performance is going to decline. Okay. When the performance is going to decline, the profitability is going to decline, the share prices are going to decline as well. If the share prices are moving down, that means people, investors are selling that particular share in the market. So overall, the equity market, the stock market will be declining, or the index, if you are talking about, will have a drop in the market. Assume interest rates are increasing. Go to maybe, it's so bright. Okay, if the interest rates are increasing, what's going to happen? Sorry, interest rates are going to decrease. What's going to happen? Finance cost of a company is now going to drop. Now, when the finance cost is declining, performance will improve, essentially resulting in higher profits. So that will result in share prices moving up. Why is it moving up? So many investors are willing to buy. So when the market prices or the share prices are moving up, equity market index will also move up. When so many buying happening, so many demand happening, the prices of the shares are increasing. So the market activities are improving. Okay, that's one angle. Why? What is the angle in the first one? We're talking about interest rate impacting the listed companies' performance through finance cost. All right. The second one is opportunity cost. Okay. Now I am an investor, equity market investor, and I have a stock portfolio, equity portfolio, and all of a sudden, central bank is coming up with an announcement saying the interest rates are increased, or the T-bill rates are increasing, policy rates are increased. Now, market interest rates is around 15%. Assume market interest rates are 15%. Now, what's my opportunity cost? If I'm in my equity market, for me to move to the debt market and invest, I'm avoiding that. I'm not moving to the debt market. I'm in my equity market. So what am I losing? I'm losing 15% of interest. So when the opportunity cost is increasing, when the interest rate was only 5%, let's say, and has moved up to 10 or 15%, now what am I going to do? I am really wondering why am I taking additional risk in the stock market when I can simply invest in a debt instrument and get 15%? So when the interest rate is increasing, my opportunity cost will increase. When my opportunity cost is increasing, there'll be investors getting out of the equity market and moving to the debt market. So how do they get out of the equity market? They will start selling their shares. So when they sell their shares, what happens? The share prices is going to decrease. So much of selling in the market. And ideally, they will move out from the equity market. What happens when the interest rate is low? Current interest rate, let's assume, was 10%. And now all of a sudden, central bank announces their policy interest rates are cut, SRR is cut, liquidity is injected into the market, and now interest rates are brought down to 4%. Now my opportunity cost is less. What I'm losing has reduced. So I would say, instead of going to the debt market for a 3-4%, I can invest in the stock market and get higher returns by taking that additional risk. So we might as well move to the equity market and get better returns. So if you're moving into the equity market, you're going to buy more. You're going to create a portfolio, correct? So you're going to demand for more shares, resulting in share prices to move up. Eventually, the equity market to perform well. Okay, so these are two ways, even though that interest rate doesn't have a direct association to the equity market, it affects the equity market even indirectly. Okay, so these are two ways that it can affect. Especially now, you should be seeing this performance because currently the interest rates have come down, especially during this COVID pandemic time. So many banks offering moratoriums, you would see sudden decline in finance cost of certain companies that will eventually improve profits and could even up the share price. And when the market interest rates are low, people would be encouraged to move to the equity market. If you were going through market development news at the during this week, you would see our stock market surpassed, actually hit 6 billion turnover limit. So you can see the stock market performing very well. Turnover crossing to even 9 billion. Okay, if you have time, go through stock exchange certain annual reports. There also you will see this impact. If I'm remembering correctly, let me show it to you. So see this particular company, you could see there's a drastic decline in their finance cost. Did you see that? Yes, business profits are also increasing, but given that this is an additional boost, imagine a 30% decline that is also going to boil down and improve your profitability. So these are ways that it could indirectly influence the stock market. All right. Now, what we are going to talk today about the stock market is the stock market efficiency. Okay, what do you mean by this stock market efficiency? Market efficiency, the term called market efficiency, refers to the degree to which a financial security, so here we're going to talk about shares, stocks, stock prices, adjust to news or new information, and the degree along with the speed for the stock price to move and reflect the new information. That is what they refer to the term as market efficiency. Now, market efficiency is a general term. That's why we are using financial security. We are talking about stock market efficiency. So our focus here is going to be on the stock prices. How quickly and how well are the stock prices moving to the new information released about a particular company. Okay, now in a efficient market, if a market is considered to be very efficient, the price in that particular market is always reflecting all the public information, all available information is reflected in that price. Now, if you are new about what's happening in the stock market, we could go through our Colombo Stock Exchange website. We know market every day due to market activities. every day due to market activities. Share prices keeps moving. Okay, so these are the movements that usually happen. All right. So if there is a sudden new information about this company during this trading time, what does the concept of stock market efficiency telling us? When there is a new information, ideally, the market should quickly react to it and adjust. Okay, so let's say it's a positive information. Now, if you take this particular company, Brown's Investment, they have acquired a hotel group from Hemas, Serendip, and then they have some certain plans in the port city. So they are good, positive news. Though the moment that news hit, the positive news, so when the positive news hits the market, you expect all of a sudden immediate price increase to reflect the positive news. Now, this is just a one-day price movement. These announcements came, I think, beginning of the week. So earlier, this particular share was around 2.5 rupees, 2 rupees and 50 cents. And now you can see from 2 rupees and 50 cents, it's now closer to 7 rupees. Okay, so that's how the market reaction had occurred. I'm unable to have a much longer date range. So if we move here and I show it to you, when there is a positive news release, and this is the usual at present the market. Okay, then all of a sudden when there is a positive reaction or the positive news, there should be two things. One is there should be an immediate reaction. Remember, we are talking about the speed. The reaction should occur instantaneously, immediately. Okay. The other is the degree of the change. If this news is going to result in the company's share price to increase by 2 rupees, that is the fundamental increase that we can expect. But if the moment the news comes, if the market, yes, it's going to react immediately, all right. But if it reacts by increasing the price by 4 rupees, it's going to be an overreaction. Okay. We expect the fundamental, when you calculate, you expect the market price to move by only 2 rupees. If it moves immediately and moves exactly by the 2 rupees that is anticipated, it's an efficient market. Okay. But if there is a deviation between these two, if the change didn't happen immediately, and if the change is a over or under reaction, then it's going to result in an inefficient market. Now, what did we say as an efficient market? Efficient market meaning the price should reflect all information. Okay. All information that is already included in the share price. Now, in this particular, if the share price at the moment here reflects all possible information about this share. Okay. So the investors cannot earn any abnormal return in an efficient market. Why? The market price is the intrinsic price of this share. Okay, all the information is already included. The particular price reflects all information. So investor cannot have any unknown news about the company to get an additional gain. All right. So in an efficient market, you cannot have abnormal returns. I will explain that to you when we go through a diagram as well. So let's assume some kind of a new information. It's a positive news release is coming to the market. So the security or the share will have an old price, and moment the new price hits, the price will adjust instantly and to the correct degree. All right. So it's a immediate increase, and from there on, this is going to be the new ongoing price. Okay. Now this is happening in a efficient market. In a I'm unable to write. In an efficient market, you anticipate this change to happen. Okay. If you can write it somewhere, this particular change is what is expected in an efficient market. But practically, we know that most markets are inefficient. What do you mean by inefficient? Remember, there are two things. Even though there is a new information to the market, maybe the market is not immediately reacting for that, or even though they immediately react, there is an overreaction and an underreaction. Okay. So when there is an inefficiency in the market, now investors or certain investors are going to be able to get a abnormal profit. Okay, a profit that the other investors are not going to earn. Now let's see this example. Now this is a positive news release. Let's assume, let's take the earlier company that we were discussing, the company which bought a new hotel and is going to go into Port City. Okay. Earlier they were at 2.5 the share. All of a sudden, the news comes to the market. Look here, this company has bought a hotel group from another person, another group. Okay, now that's a positive news. Okay, it's a positive news that they've acquired something. They are going for a business expansion. So that's a positive news. Okay, but there can be a underreaction in the market. Why? Now this company is buying a hotel chain. Currently, are hotels considered lucrative? No, tourism is impacted. So buying a hotel group now might be, investors might think, why are we locking in money in such a sector now? That sector is not performing well. Maybe when we are in the verge of coming out of this pandemic, putting money into a hotel sector is better. So maybe in the initial days, the reaction is not so favorable. Still, the market price continues to be in the same range. Okay. But slowly but surely, now people learn, no, tourists are allowed to come. Now buying now it's a cheap price to buy such a group. They would have a gain in the market. They could invest, improve. So once they learn the true potential, the market will reach its correct or the efficient price path. And then from there on, the price will reflect the new information. It will reflect the correct impact of the new information. Okay. Okay. Now, let's talk about this period. Now, was there a immediate reaction? No. Was there a correct degree of change? No. There was an underreaction. Even though it's a positive news release, there was an underreaction in the market. All right. Now, in this kind of a situation, remember, if you are in this particular time period, this particular time, there'll be some investors with this underreaction. Okay. Certain smart investors. Remember, certain smart investors who are able to truly identify the impact of this positive news, what will they do now? They will start to buy this share at this time. They will start collecting this share at this time. Look here, market has still not reacted, still not reacted. So they will keep buying. They know when the market reacts, price is going to get increased. Okay. So when they collect at this price level and slowly but surely market moves to reflect the positive news, they can dump or sell off the bought shares and move out. Now this is an abnormal gain. Why? Some investors are able to make use of this underreaction and get a gain. Okay. So because of that, it's considered an abnormal return. Why is this abnormal return coming? Because the market didn't act efficiently. It did not act in an efficient manner. So in an inefficient market, it will result in a abnormal return earning opportunity. Okay. Let's go to the other way. Same thing. Positive news release. Now we are going to look into a overreaction in the market. Okay. Now, if just as before, the companies, this is the usual price path of the company without any new, without any knowledge of the new company information. Okay. Now, at this point, the new information is released to the market. Even here, remember, this line reflects that the news has been announced to the market. Everyone knows this information. But it's how the different investors perceive this information. Okay. Now, in this scenario, once the news is released, it was stock is at ₹2.50. Okay. Immediately when the news is released, all of a sudden the market is reacting very well. Oh my God, it was unexpected. It was a surprise to the market. All of a sudden, price shoots up. They are expecting, my God, this will improve the company such way, such way. They are like, overreacting. to the new information. And then slowly but surely they will learn, okay, that might not happen. That's not that such kind of a improvement is unrealistic. Maybe they might end up with a positive increase of maybe 20-30%, not a 50% or a 80% increase in profit. So once they realize their overreaction, price will gradually move or decline and will reach the efficient price path. Okay. Now again, we are going to talk about this particular period during this overreaction. Now, if I am an investor, I already have this particular share with me. Okay. When this news comes out, I know, okay, it's a good news. I know it's a good news. This company is going to do well. Share price of this company is going to improve. I know that information. But I know the improvement is not going to be much. Maybe 2 rupees increase in the share price. Okay. You have a general idea now. Okay. But all of a sudden, when this news is out, so many new investors come to demand this particular stock immediately. Okay. Now, reaction is very immediate. They immediately come to the market. But the degree of change is an overreaction. Now they are demanding now for a two. Earlier it was a 2.5 share. Now they are demanding 10 rupees, 12 rupees for this share. So when it reaches 10, 12, myself, who's already a shareholder, I already have the shares of this company. I know that this company's share is not worth 10, 12 rupees. How can it go so up? It's unrealistic. Market will realize it that price will decline. I know that. But it's an opportunity for me. I know the 2.5 shares price will increase to, let's say, 6 rupees. That's the realistic price. 6 to 7 rupees. Okay. But all of a sudden, when the market goes to 10, I will say, okay, good time. Let's sell this off at 10 rupees. I get more gain. 2.5 rupee cost share. I'm selling at 10 rupees. Might as well earn that income. So I will quickly sell off at 10 rupees. Then I know slowly the share price is now coming down. Why? People realize it's not worth this much. When people start realizing, share price will now, so many sellers will start to sell. When they sell down, price will now come to 7, 6. And now it reaches 6. I like, okay, let's buy the stock again. Why? I got 10 rupees. So nearly 7.5 rupee gain for one share. Okay. So out of that gain, I might as well buy another share at least. Okay. So they would again reinvest and get a unusual, abnormal gain just from this information, just from that inefficiency. Okay. That's what is highlighted here. So from overreaction, the existing shareholders can get a benefit. Sometimes a shareholder who buys just before this reaction is also able to benefit from this. Okay. So when there is an overreaction and an underreaction, we say that the market is inefficient. So when it's inefficient, the time of news revelation and the adjustment to the new equilibrium price, informed investors would be able to profit at the expense of the less informed investors, because I'm able to gauge that this increase is unwarranted. It's not possible. Then I am an informed decision maker. There will be some investors who are unable to understand that. They will lose and I will gain. Okay. So here this is a all those information added on this particular graph. Just for your understanding purpose, I'm including this here. You could see old value is here. Okay. If the market is able to immediately react, immediate reaction and correct reaction, you know, this is the new value. This is the old value and this is the new value. Okay. This is the new value. This is the change that I'm talking about. Okay. In a perfect, efficient market, the change is going to happen immediately, and to the correct degree. I'm unable to highlight it. Okay, to the correct degree. All right. But in an inefficient market, what's going to happen? In an inefficient market, even though the price, sometimes even though the reaction is in the correct timing, it is immediate, correct, but it's a overreaction. Sometimes no, the reaction is not immediate, but why? It's an underreaction. People don't see the positive of it. So both these overreaction and the underreaction shows the inefficiency in the market. Okay. Now there are certain points that I want you to know here. Okay. There are two different concepts. One is market value and one is intrinsic value. Okay. Market value and intrinsic value. What is market value? It is the current price of that particular stock. So if I'm going to the website today, the current market price of this stock, 6.5. Okay. Intrinsic value is what is the real value of this particular stock? What is the fundamental value of this particular stock? I know in the future, this company is going to earn in these avenues. It's going to have growth in so many sectors. So many improvements are going to happen. So I will forecast their future cash flows and then discount it, divide it, and arrive at divide by the number of shares and arrive at the intrinsic value of this share. What is the real value of this share? Keep in mind, intrinsic value is not the par value. Okay. Intrinsic value is the real value of the stock based on the future cash flow. Assume this is the stock. Based on the future cash flow, what is the real value of this? The market, let's say market says this is 100 rupees. But what is the real price of this is what I'm looking at. Okay. Just like that, in terms of a stock, market says it's 6.5. Yes. But when I forecast the future cash flows, discount and arrive at the fundamental value of this share, what is that value? If that value is also 6.5, which means market value is equal, let's not draw it up here, is equal to the intrinsic value, that means it's an efficient market. Why am I saying that? Why am I saying if the market value is equal to the intrinsic value, it's an efficient market? Because the current price of the stock reflects all information about this stock, all available information is reflected here. Remember, when we're calculating intrinsic value, we take all these into consideration. Acquisition of a new company, expansion, everything into consideration, and we arrive at the value. Now that value is matching to our market value, which says that, look here, it's an efficient market. The price reflects all information. Good. If the price is only 4.5, I calculate based on the intrinsic cash flows, intrinsic value of this company, and I arrive that the fundamental value of this stock is only 4.5, but the market is saying it's 6.5. First question is it an efficient market? No. Inefficient market. Why? The price doesn't reflect the correct information. Something like an overreaction is happening right now. Okay? And stock is currently overpriced. Overpriced. The real value is only 4.5, but the market is going at 6.5. So when the market price is greater than the intrinsic value, one, inefficient market, other, it's an overpriced stock. What is the other scenario? Market value is at 6.5, but the intrinsic value of the stock is 10.5. When I do the cash flows and discount and get at my price, now that value says the real value of this stock is 10.5, but the market is still assuming it's 6.5. First question, is it efficient or inefficient? Inefficient. Why? It's an underreaction going in the market. The market hasn't correctly identified the true value. Second is, the stock is currently underpriced. So whenever the market value is less than the intrinsic value, inefficient market and also underpriced. So understand that in an efficient market, if you can note this point, in an efficient market, no one can beat the market. Why? All information are reflected in the share prices. Okay. So no one can find an overpriced share. No one can find an underpriced share. So if there is not an overpriced and an underpriced stock, is there a way for you to get abnormal returns? No. Therefore, you are unable to beat the market. Okay. Remember that. So as per stock market efficiency, the belief is the current price reflects all the present value of the company in terms of future dividends. So if the profit is improving, the future dividends are expected to improve. Ideally, all those are reflected in the stock market, current market price. Now, Eugene Farmer, okay, economist, he came up with a term or a hypothesis called the efficient market hypothesis. Okay, efficient market hypothesis. He said, look here, all markets are informationally efficient. Okay, they are informationally efficient. Markets are generally informationally efficient. And because they are informationally efficient, the investor cannot consistently earn abnormal returns. Why? The information is available in the market. Okay. it's already reflected in the stock prices, so there is no any additional information that the investor knows. Because of that, you can't get an abnormal return. But he also emphasized, yes, that's the extreme of efficiency. When the market is completely efficient, that would happen. No one can earn a abnormal return, no one can beat the market, but there are other types of markets in the practical world. He said there are three particular types of market efficiency. One is weak form, semi-strong, and third one being strong. Okay, we are going to see what each of these efficiencies tell us. First one is weak form of market efficiency. Now this tells you, let's take our drawing board. Okay. Now in the weak form, what we're going to talk about the weak form. In the weak form, it tells you that the current market price reflects all information about the past prices. Understand again, weak form of market efficiency tells you that current market price reflects all past prices. So just because you know the past price movement, you cannot forecast the future price movement. Okay, let's go to the note and understand as well. Current asset prices reflect all past, again underline here the word past, but yes, that's also publicly available, but past information, especially trade related information. So I'm specifically talking about the past prices in the market. Just because you have the previous prices of the stock, you cannot anticipate today's prices or the future prices. We are taking it here. Just because we know all these movement, you and I can't say, okay, yesterday or the last week there was no any change in the stock market price, so this week also price will remain the same. We can't have that expectation. Why? That is already included in this price. It's no any new information already reflected in the market price. So using the past price movement, you and I can't say stock price will move up, stock price will remain change or move down. We can't forecast that. Okay. But if you have any new information, then you are able to predict the future price movement. Now, if I know this company is going to expand or put up a new apartment in Port City. Okay. Now that information, is it reflected in the current market price, in the existing market price? No. Existing market price is only reflecting the past prices. Then using that new information, I know, yes, surely the price is going to move up. So using that, an informed investor can make a return. That's what a weak form of market efficiency tells us. This implies the future price movements are determined entirely by information not contained in the past price series or entirely from the new information released in the market. Now here, I want you to make a small note. Write it there, even though it doesn't make sense to you now. When we go to the stock market lecture and when I explain a certain topic, I will come back to this. Okay? Make a note here saying, in a weak form of market efficiency, technical analysis doesn't help. Just write it somewhere. Technical analysis doesn't help in a weak form of market efficiency. What is this technical analysis? Now, there are ways for you to analyze a stock market or a stock price. Technical analysis tells you the future price movement depends on the past prices. Now, that technique you can't use here. Why? The past prices are already reflected in the current price. Okay, so you can't use that technique to predict the future. So that's why I'm asking you to mention that. Can you use a fundamental analysis? Yes. What is fundamental analysis? Technical analysis is one type, other one is fundamental analysis. Fundamental analysis is where you use new information happening in the market and forecast the future prices. So in a weak form, technical analysis, no point. You can't get any use of it. You can't anticipate the future. But from fundamental analysis, where using the new information, you can forecast the future price movement, you are able to get better returns in a weak form market. Okay. Next, we have semi-strong form of market efficiency. In the semi-strong form of market efficiency, the key term is stock prices reflect all publicly available information. Now it should click you. It's not only past, earlier we looked at publicly available information. Publicly available information. But it was only past publicly available information. This was weak. Let me draw you a clear diagram. In the weak form, we saw past publicly available info. Okay, so this was the weak form. Okay, now in the semi-strong form of market efficiency, it tells us current stock price reflect all public information. Now it says, oh, not only past, it has to include all publicly available. So all publicly available info. This is a semi-strong market. So that means, yes, it has the past public information as well, and it has any new information coming to the market which is publicly informed. Key term, publicly, it should be publicly available for you. Let's see the example. Public information includes announcements of company events, economic and political news and events. Thus, if investors employ investment strategy based on the use of publicly available information, they cannot earn abnormal profits. Now, earlier we learned if you know the new information, new but publicly announced information, you are able to get returns in a weak form of market, weak form of efficiency. But in a semi-strong market efficiency, even though the new publicly available information is announced, that is immediately reflected in the stock price. Okay? Because of that, by using ways to analyze the stock, using new information. What am I talking about? We're talking about fundamental analysis. By using fundamental analysis now, I can't earn any abnormal profit. In a weak form, I was able using fundamental analysis. But in a semi-strong market, by using a fundamental analysis, I'm unable to get a abnormal profit. Okay. Now we move to the strong form of market efficiency. What does this tell you? Current asset prices reflects all public information, not only public but also private. So simply, we are talking about all information in the market, whether it's public or private, all information is reflected in the stock price when it comes to a strong form of market efficiency. What is this private information? What is this private information? Certain information which is unknown to the public, not yet announced, but is known to the insiders of a certain company. The directors might be aware, the employees might be aware of it. It's privately kept. Company might announce it in the future, but at the moment it's private. Now, if we are looking at the same company, the example we could use is, if we know that certain stock is reflecting the past prices, okay, and immediately there is an announcement to the stock exchange saying this particular market is, this particular company is buying a hotel group. It's new information. So moment the new information comes, you can use that new information and earn an abnormal profit. Why? That new information is not yet included or not yet reflected in the current market price. Okay. In the semi-strong market, there is an announcement that the company is moving into the hotel market, hotel sector, acquiring a hotel group, sorry. But moment that information is hit, the stock price get adjusted. So that new information is already absorbed into the current price. So can I get any additional abnormal profit out of it? No. It's already reflected in the stock market price. Okay. Now, in a strong form of market, what are we telling you? The current stock prices does not only include all publicly available information, but if this company is still working on announcing acquiring a hotel group, that private information, they have not yet announced in the Colombo Stock Exchange, but that private information is also included in the stock price. The stock price already shows that. Then you call it a strong form of market. In a strong form market, none of the information can be used to get an abnormal return. Okay, in a weak market, we were able to use new information and get an abnormal return. Okay, if I'm writing it in red, in a weak market, new information, new publicly available info gave abnormal return. In a semi-strong market, if you have any private information, that gave you abnormal return. Why? All other information is reflected in the price. But in a semi-strong form, all the information are already shown in the share price. What else is there for you? So in a strong form of market, no one can use anything to beat the market. That's the extreme or the supreme of market efficiency. Okay. Strong form implies that you cannot make abnormal return from trading on inside information. Strong form of efficiency is not supported by empirical studies. So when pharma put forward these theories, so many researchers use this theory to test whether certain markets, whether the US stock market is a semi-strong, strong or weak. So they were testing whether the stock market belonged in which category. They understood that practically most of the world stock markets are semi-strong efficient. Why did they come up with this conclusion or this idea? Why were the gathered data supported this? Because in all these markets, whenever there is a inside information, certain investor, the investor who had the knowledge of that private information, was able to get an abnormal gain. So for that to happen, can it be a strong form market? No. It definitely has to be a semi-strong market. Because only in a semi-strong market, if you have private information, you can get abnormal profits. Okay. So most of the world stock markets are considered to be semi-strong. And strong form efficiency is not supported to exist in the practical world. Why? Because using inside information itself is considered, is prohibited, it's illegal. Okay. Why? Having that is going to give you an undue advantage and get you a very abnormally high gain. Okay. Because of that, most economies or most stock markets are considered to be semi-strong form, not strong efficient. So what I drew is reflected here. It's just three stages. Okay. Now you will be wondering, so anyone who has private information, aren't they allowed to trade in the stock market? No. Directors of a certain company who knows everything what's happening in the company, who knows the future, everything, they are allowed to trade. But whenever they do a trade in the stock exchange, they are mandated or regulated to announce it into the stock market. They need to inform the quantity they bought, the price they bought. Those sensitive information had to be announced. I hope I can show it to you now. See, this particular company, one of their directors have bought, oh sorry, here one of the spouse of the directors have bought shares. So related party buying it. So there again, you could see they have informed the quantity, the date of purchase, and the price at which they bought. All those sensitive information are announced. So there cannot be any illegal activity. Even, do you understand that? So within 5 days of doing the trade, they're supposed to announce it to the stock exchange. So with that, we can wind up this week's lecture. So we are finishing off the topic on fundamentals of financial markets. I hope you all got a clear idea of this. I was hoping to start money market as well. Anyway, the money market notes are all uploaded for you. If you have time, go through that. We will start our next week lecture from the fresh topic called money market and money market instruments. Okay. So thank you so much for listening. We'll meet next week. Okay.